Welcome back everyone, it is Mike from ManaHoarders. In this video we are bringing you a commander deck tech for a new commander from the streets of New Capenna, Cormela, Glamour Thief. You can cast this commander for 1 in Grixis. You get a 2/4 legendary vampire rogue with haste. You can pay 1 mana and tap Cormela to add Grixis to your mana pool, but you can only spend this mana to cast instants and sorceries. Also, whenever she dies, you can return up to 1 target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. Before we dive into the deck, let's go over a few key points. First up, the final price for this build came in at $160.43. This does include the price of our commander and all of our lands. Now do bear in mind, some of these prices will vary greatly depending on the quality of the cards you purchase, the vendor you use, and a variety of other factors. While there have been a lot of new commanders coming out in the streets of New Capenna that have been turning heads, I feel Cormela may have been overlooked. I think one thing people don't realize is her insane combo potential, which is going to be the basis of this build. The backbone of our infinite combo relies on Cormela tapping for mana, dying, getting instants and sorceries back from our graveyard to our hand, and then recasting those to generate infinite mana and infinite ETB and death triggers. Now, I will be the first to admit that the combo is rather fragile due to the amount of setup that it requires and the amount of ways that our opponents can interact with our board or potentially turn off our combo. So just something to bear in mind before we jump into it. Now the star of the show is of course our commander. The fact that she has haste means she can enter, and as long as we have the 1 mana to pay to activate her ability, she can tap to add the 3 colored mana for our instants and sorceries. Also, when she dies, we'll get an instant or sorcery back from our graveyard, meaning we can potentially recast these same spells over and over to keep generating more and more value. The next part of the combo relies around our instants we will be using to target Cormela so that when she dies, she'll come right back to the battlefield. Now all of these do essentially the same thing. Whenever the creature dies, it comes back to the battlefield under its owner's control. Abnormal Endurance, Demonic Gifts will actually allow it to enter the battlefield untapped, Fake Your Own Death, Feign Death, Malakir Rebirth, Return to Action, Supernatural Stamina, and Undying Malice. Now, as you can tell, a lot of the instants we are going to be casting on Cormela require her to enter the battlefield tapped, meaning she won't be able to use her ability to generate that mana again. So to get around this, we have 2 cards. Amulet of Vigor, whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped and under your control, untap it. And Intruder Alarm. Creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps, but whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. Now this could potentially backfire if our opponents have ways to generate value from tapping and untapping their own creatures, but really as long as they're not interacting with our board or gaining tons of life, it really won't be able to stop our combo. Next up we have our sack outlets. Ashnod's Altar. This is going to be in fact the best case scenario. We can sacrifice Cormela to add 2 colorless mana. That means whenever she enters the battlefield and untaps, we can use that mana to activate her ability to generate the colored mana once again to recast the instant or sorcery we get back from our graveyard. We also have Goblin Bombardment, so that every time we sacrifice her, we're going to deal 1 damage to any target. In Viscera Seer, we can sacrifice a creature and scry 1. Now in the event we do not get to Ashnod's Altar, we do have Pitiless Plunderer and Stormkiln Artist. Pitiless Plunderer reads, whenever a creature we control dies, we get a treasure token, meaning we can use this for her mana ability, and Stormkiln Artist. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, which we will be doing plenty, we get a treasure token. Again, we can sacrifice this to activate her tap ability to keep generating that colored mana off our commander. Now that we've gone over the majority of our combo, all we need now is my favorite part, ways to kill our opponents. Now admittedly, this first card I almost overlooked, but for 1 mana it is very hard to beat. Altar of the Brood. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts a top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard, meaning every time Cormela enters the battlefield from the reanimation, our opponents will mill a card. So if we do this infinitely, they will have no cards left in their deck, so at the beginning of their turn, they will lose. Bastion of Remembrance. Whenever a creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 and we gain 1. Comet Storm. Choose any target, then choose another target for each time the spell was kicked. It deals X damage to each of them. As our commander is tapping for mana, we will mostly be using the black mana for our reanimator spells, and potentially 1 other mana needed for some of them, which means 1 mana will be left over floating, so as long as that mana is red, we can infinitely generate this red mana to generate a giant Comet Storm and wipe out all 3 of our opponents at the same time. That is the exact same basis we have for Fireball, except we can only do this at sorcery speed, so a bit slower, but again, nonetheless effective. Plus, how fun is it to throw a giant fireball at your opponent's faces? Firebrand Archer, since we will be casting tons of instants to target our commander, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, deals 1 damage to each opponent. Same thing with Gutter Snipe, except we will be dealing 2 damage each time. Impact Tremors, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So as Cormela keeps coming back into the battlefield, our opponent's life totals will be dwindling to nothing. Kessig Flame Breather, Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Sir Conrad the Grim. Whenever another creature dies, a creature is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to our opponents. Vindictive Vampire. Whenever another creature we control dies, deals 1 damage to each opponent and we gain a life. And Zulaport Cutthroat. Whenever another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 and we gain 1. Now let's jump into the remainder of our deck. First up are our artifacts. Arcane Signet can tap to add 1 mana of any color of our commander's color identity. Demir's Signet can tap to add a blue or a black. Izzet Signet can tap to add a blue or a red. Obelisk of Grixis can tap to add a blue, black, or red mana. Rakdos Signet can tap for a black or a red. And Sol Ring taps for 2 colorless mana. Moving on to our creatures, we do have some legends helping out our commander. Deco Fractal Theorist. Whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, we get a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Then we put X/1/1 counters on it, where X is that spell's mana value. Godrock the Crown Scourge. At the beginning of our end step, we create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. Talrand Sky Summoner. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we get a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. Veyran Voice of Duality, a personal favorite of mine. If casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell would cause a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And Zada Hedron Grinder. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada Hedron Grinder, we copy that spell for each other creature we control that the spell could target. Then each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So if we are reanimating Cormela, we could potentially reanimate our entire board. And for our not-so-legendary creatures, Archaeomancer. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we can return target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. Archmage Emeritus. Whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, we can draw a card. Battlefield Thaumaturge. Each instant and sorcery spell we cast costs 1 less to cast for each creature it targets. Also, whenever we cast a spell that targets Battlefield Thaumaturge, he gains hexproof until the end of the turn. Impulsive Pilferer. Whenever it dies, we get a treasure token. Murmuring Mystic. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we get a 1/1 blue bird illusion creature token with flying. Nightscape Familiar. Blue spells and red spells we cast cost 1 less. Shambling Ghast. Whenever it dies, we can choose 1. Target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn, or we create a treasure token. And Tidal Barracuda. Any player may cast spells as though they had flash, but we mostly want it for the second ability to limit interactions from our opponents. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Moving on to our enchantments. Double Vision. Whenever we cast our first instant or sorcery spell each turn, we copy that spell, and we may choose new targets for the copy. Freed from the Reel. We can enchant a creature, we can pay a blue mana to tap the enchanted creature, or a blue mana to untap the enchanted creature. Now again, this really won't work with generating infinite mana from our commander's ability, since that mana can only be used to cast instant or sorceries. It can't be used to activate abilities. However, if we do have enough mana on the board, we could potentially activate that ability multiple times to cast a really big spell. Kaya's Ghost Form. We can enchant a creature or planeswalker we control. Whenever the enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, we can return that card to the battlefield under our control. And Metallurgic Summonings. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we get an XX colorless construct artifact creature token, where X is that spell's mana value. For our instance, Aphotic Wisps. Target creature becomes black and gains fear until end of turn, and we draw a card. Cerulean Wisps. Target creature becomes blue until end of turn, we untap that creature, and we draw a card. Heartless Act. We can choose 1, destroy target creature with no counters on it, or remove up to 3 counters from target creature. Opt. We can scry 1 and draw 1. Power Word Kill. Destroy target non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon creature. Radical Idea. We can draw a card, but it also has Jumpstart. Resculpt. We can exile target artifact or creature, and its controller creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. And Slip Through Space. Target creature can't be blocked this turn, and we can draw a card. We will be including 1 planeswalker in this build, Saheeli Sublime Artificer. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. Moving on to our sorceries, Diabolic Tutor. We can search our library for a card, put that card into our hand, and then shuffle. Exhume. Each player puts a creature card from their graveyard onto the battlefield. This is a way to get our commander back, though not as effective as some of our instant speed counterparts, though this could backfire because it does again allow our opponents to get their creatures back as well. Feed the Swarm. We can destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. We lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. Preordain. We can scry 2 and then draw a card. Scour All Possibilities does much the same. And Solve the Equation. We can search our library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, put it into our hand, and then shuffle. And last but not least is our mana base. We are going to be keeping things very basic with 12 basic swamps, 12 basic islands, and 11 basic mountains. And just like that, we've reached the end of this commander deck tech for Cormela Glamour Thief. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and leave a comment down below. Let us know what commanders you would like to see us build around in the future. I am working on a few videos of some requests from some viewers, so I hope to get those out to you soon. I really appreciate all of your support.